I just wanted to thank you, Lilada, for coming back again after the last event. And again, for the viewers who will be seeing this in the follow-up email, wanted to remind you that we really want you to drive these Lean Into Allyship conversations. And so Lilada is the first person that we had asked to answer the questions that we didn't have time to get to in the event. So I'm really excited to hear that. And then we are going to wrap up with that Patreon challenge that we had talked about and talk about some fun that we'll be having coming up in the near future. So
Yes.
with that, we'll jump right in, Lilada. One of the first questions, again, and this will be in the order in which they were received in the event. So we apologize ahead if we don't remember the full context, but we'll do our best throughout this as well. And so the first question came in, what is the criteria that determines when a Black child should be removed from a home? And this is, again, I think when we were talking about the fatherlessness and some of those topics.
That's a really great question. And what I've noticed over the years is that criteria has gotten, I'm not exactly sure how to say it, if it's getting easier or harder, where there's more children who are being removed from their homes, more Black children. And there's a disparity with so many things, particularly in Dane County. There's also disparity between the number of Black children and white children who are removed from their homes. And what I've seen, being a social worker, being just around working in schools and community for 30 years, and what I've seen as being a foster mother myself, um, is that Black mothers are held to a different standard. They really, really are. And it reminds me much of slavery with Black children who were ripped from their mother's arms. Foster care system is much like that. You'd have a scenario where, a mother may be struggling, financially. And just a financial struggle could lead to this snowball rolling downhill kind of an issue, where if the system supported this mom $300, $400, $500 more a month, that could totally change whether or not she was homeless, whether or not she could afford a babysitter. So if she got in trouble for leaving her kids alone because she had to go to work, just $500 in most people's budgets that are struggling could make a huge difference. But no, they'll take that child or those children from that Black mother, they'll place them in a white family, and they'll pay that white mother, that white family, $1,500 a month or more, depending on what the children's
Wow.
needs are. Same
Okay.
child. And a third of that or less could make a difference with that child being in the home. Um, so what exactly is the criteria? It all depends. There is not just if a child is being physically abused, they're automatically removed. There is all levels of um, human intervention that determines whether or not that child is removed. And if you are coming from a biased point of view, guess what? More Black children get removed from their homes.
And so this was not a recorded question, but based on what you just said, my wife and I have had discussions about this. So I'd be curious to learn this a little deeper. So what's the harm to the child to be taken from their parents and put in a white family who doesn't understand the full situation of that child's life? They're trying to do a good thing, but what's the impact and the maybe unanticipated
Mhm.
result because of that?
Dan, to answer that question, I'm going to have to open this small bottle of old rum. Okay.
I like it.
Um, so here's the thing. There's something that you said, and as we are leaning into allyship, this is one of the things that we have to be very careful with. You said, well intended. Everyone is not well intended. They may
True.
be doing good things that look good, but whether we don't know their intentions. And what
Okay.
we have to do in order to be good allies for Black girls, if you want to help me defend Black girls, what we must do is stop assuming that everything white people do is well intended. Well, hang on a second.
Can't wait to the bottom of that glass.
This is going to start at the top. fuck good intentions. It's the good intentions that have led to every wrong thing that has ever happened in our world, because somebody thought they had a good intention, a good reason. So the harm is you have a scenario where children are ripped from everything that they know, from everyone that they love and who love them. And they're put in this home of someone who does not love them. And then they have this cultural difference. And just being both, again, a social worker and a foster parent myself, I've seen scenarios when I had a young lady who came into my care who was from Chicago and had an incident within her family. They had moved to Madison not long, I think it was months. And she was put in a foster family out in the country. No black people are there. This girl 6 months ago was in inner city Chicago. Now she's in country USA, no
Yep.
black people. And even if you have a family that does have a kind heart, that are trying to be culturally aware, um, they're in a school that isn't, with parents who may not be. You know, I had, when I was doing social work, I had a student who was placed out in Cambridge, and he was having a lot of trouble because he was being called the N word. He was fighting, and of course, it was always his fault. So I
Yep.
go
Of
out there
course.
and meet him for the first time. Well, he was thrilled to death that I was a black woman. He was so happy to see me. And then I'm talking to the foster parents. Now, these particular foster parents were well known within the system. They were just known as one of the best foster parents, foster families, everything. So I go out there and I'm talking to them, and they happen to know a friend of mine, black woman who was married to a white man. And they said, "Oh, yes, at our church, we call them salt and pepper couples."
Ooh.
And then he started talking about how he wanted this young man to be a credit to his race. And I'm thinking, oh my God. So this black boy is in this white city with no tolerance. He's fighting in school all the time because he's being, attacked verbally, physically. Then he comes home to these racist people, and they're being celebrated as some of the best foster parents out there. I got in my car and I just screamed at the top of my lungs. I felt like I had been teleported back to the 50s. The various things that they were saying that were just so racially charged. And I went back to my office and I went right to the foster care department and I explained to them my experience. And I said, we can't assume just because a white family wants to take black foster kids that they are not racist and that they are prepared in order to do this in a way that is healthy for that child. So it's extremely damaging.
Okay. And that's the piece that I think is often not talked about, right? Because it's viewed as they've been taken care of in the system, but
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, the system then just perpetuates what you shared as well.
It absolutely does.
Okay.
And then you look at, when you look at the social work system, social services, then again I'm saying these black children are being ripped out of their black mother's arms, placed with white families predominantly, and these white families are profiting financially. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yep. Yeah. Um, that's extremely powerful. And I think the listeners are going to learn a lot just from that little snippet, because that is not what we often hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just know that the foster system has opportunities, or we hear there's problems with it, but we don't hear it
Mm-hmm.
from that perspective. We usually hear it from the white
Mm-hmm.
perspective.
Right.
Um, and I do apologize, Lilada. The questions are going to be a little bit all over tonight because of
That's all right.
kind of how our conversation went last time. But someone was asking just for a book list, asking for a book list to provide their granddaughter that would show main characters as black and tell their stories. And so I don't know if there's necessarily a list, but what are your thoughts on a book list or books, or how that person should actually help their granddaughter?
So I have two responses to that. The first response is just do the work. You don't need to ask me for that list. Do that work. You can do that. You can go to Amazon and you can find anything. So you don't have to wait for me to do that. And I think it's just important to understand that, you could say, "Oh, I want to ask a black woman and get her thoughts." That's fine. But if you're waiting till you can do that, before you do that work for your granddaughter, your child, or your nephew, what have you, then now there's a span of time. So if you get on Amazon and Google Black Girl Books, guess what you're going to find? Black Girl Books. And if you just start with any book that has a Black girl in it in a positive way, you're going to be miles ahead of anything that they've had. Now, that being said, I actually am working on a bibliography. That being said,
Love it.
but I am working on bibliography for books for Black girls and for books for those who want to defend Black girls. But I just want the asker, and not just the asker. I want the listeners to understand that don't wait to do the work that you can do. That's a great thought, but you can do that and just start anywhere, because too many of our Black girls never see a book with anyone who looks like them in a positive way. So like I said, if you find any book, that's going to be great. And I also am going to be coming out this spring with a coloring book that is an affirmation book, particularly for Black girls, that has coloring pages and activity pages. So that's going to be available soon.
Awesome. That's
Yes.
extremely exciting, and I was expecting you to say that. That's why I kind
Yes.
of teed up the question that way as
Yes.
well. And I would also just put a plug in. I think Amazon's a great way to start, but I would also encourage the listeners to then go and support Black-owned bookstores as well, and not just supporting Amazon. Not saying that, again, don't want to get too much into that, but again, this is a daily decision about how you can support Black entrepreneurs in helping educate your granddaughter as well.
What I will throw out there right quick as well,
Sure.
this just came to mind. If you go to the Madison Public Library, there is search Defending Black Girlhood and search Black Girl Live, I believe it is. And there are some books up there that are recommended
Okay.
for Black girls. I'm going to be working with them to update that list some more, but there are some resources up there. Now, the other thing you can do, Dan, is that if you go to Amazon, and I am Amazonian, if you go to Amazon, what you can do is search for the books, and then search Google for the authors. If it's a Black author, even if you buy the book on Amazon, you are supporting that Black author too.
Okay.
But to your point, you can directly help booksellers. But if you find that there's a Black author on Amazon, that is definitely supporting that Black author.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification as well.
But I appreciate your point of what you're saying.
Perfect. And actually, the next question was about another book as well. And so this one, thank you, Gretchen, for those first two questions. And this one comes from Josie about, have you read the book Push Out? And a little bit of context here was this United Methodist women will be reading that book and having workshops on it this summer. And it sounds like she started to read it and just wanted to kind of get your perspective on it as far as what the book talks about, and didn't know if you've read it yourself.
I have not read it. I have got it teed up on my books on tape situation. So I've started listening to it. I think it's a valuable book to read. I've watched the documentary, and I've lived it. I've seen it time and time again. I think I'm thrilled that they are reading that book. And if they would be interested in having somebody come and talk, I know some people, myself, there's some, professionals I know that working in some of the public schools, that would be really good to talk, because I think sometimes it's so much easier to read something or to watch something or to do something about those people over there, reading that author from New York. But there are people right here in Dane County that could tell you about some push-outs that are happening right here in our greater Madison area. So I'm thrilled that they are reading that book. That is fantastic. I would encourage them to connect with some local folks that can help to bring some insight to what's going on here.
Awesome. And I would say, Josie, again, reach out to myself or Nehemiah. And again, we can make sure we can always have additional conversations on that. I know in our last discussion as well, we did talk about your art, specifically on the fact that there's no faces on
Hmm.
the yard signs. And this question came in as well regarding your art. Is there something behind the sunflower art that you've done?
Mm, I love that question so much. I'm gonna love it a little bit more in a minute.
This is so much more fun.
So, like one summer, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I took pictures of sunflowers all summer long. That's just like my thing all summer long. I would pull my car over in the middle of the street. If I see some sunflowers, I would take sunflowers. And I looked at sunflowers as personalities, like not just this flower, but like this is an individual person. How would I photograph them? And it was joyful for me. Sunflowers are like the sunshine, and it's like life and joy. So fast forward, they're one of my favorite flowers to use when I do art because it reminds me of joy and peace and summer and happiness. And I'm always working to portray Black women and Black girls as happy, as peaceful, as joyful, the way that we should be. But thank
Awesome.
you for noticing that. Good
And
eye.
yes,
That's the
and so
first time
that
I've ever been asked that question.
really okay.
Yeah,
And that came from, and I may get the name wrong, but Dian or Dion. And so thank you for that question.
great question.
And I know we had talked about the number of Black girls or women that go missing each year, and this
Mhm.
person, so Lawrence mentioned, 65,000 Black girls or women go missing each year. And I know we talked about one of the seasons of your podcast where you talked about a local woman in that situation as well. And they had a question: is there any central or well-known go-to database website that helps those that are affected, the family or friends, to get the word out for that missing person case? And they assume that they could help relatives, but how important do you think that service would be in helping those families?
Great question. And I just want to actually focus in. That's a cumulative number. That's not every year 65,000 go missing.
Okay.
So that's a number that is built up, and of Black girls and women who have been reported missing. Some of those numbers have been missing for 10, 15 years, okay? Or maybe longer. So it's a cumulative number. Um, but great numbers of Black girls are missing every year. So, you know, if we just started with when a Black girl's missing, you do an Amber Alert. If we just started there, then I believe we would have a quicker turnaround with finding these Black girls and getting them home. There was a Black girl, and I don't know the details of the situation, but I know about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a Black girl who went missing in Milwaukee area.
Yep. Yep.
There was almost immediately an Amber Alert. And guess what? Within, I believe, 24 hours, that girl was returned home. Don't tell me that Amber Alert didn't help that. Don't tell me the fact that the police were revving up and looking for her, that it didn't help that. So I think more needs to be done when girls are missing. But I think what we have to do is, why are Black girls missing? Where do they go missing from? And we need to do the preventative work, because looking after the fact, I
Sure.
don't care what kind of database you have, is always going to be a challenge still to find. What we need to do is see what we can do to prevent that. You talked about push out. Well, when girls aren't in school, guess what? They have less accountability for where they are. There's less grown people in their lives watching over them. So even when you look at the number of Black girls who are suspended from school, that impacts whether or not they're vulnerable and something happens and then they're gone. So I think,
Okay.
I think let's push towards what we can do to make sure that while we have our Black girls, we're defending them and we're watching them so they don't go missing on our watch.
That makes a lot of sense. And so thank you again, Lawrence, for that question. And going to the next one, Teresa. And again, there's a little bit of context here, just about how Teresa's raising her teen grandkids in a predominantly white community. And they
Mm-hmm.
often tell her about how they have to define their blackness to their white students. And if they refuse to engage in the conversation, they're
Mm-hmm.
seen as gruff. And this may be the same as when this person went through school many years ago, and her answer to them is they don't have to define who they are or what they are to anyone. Do you feel like that's the best way to handle the situation? Or I'll add to the question, is there additional advice you would give in that situation, given that context?
That's a white way to handle the situation. And Black people cannot handle Black problems the white way. So the privilege that a white person would say, oh, you don't have to define yourself to anyone. No, you don't have to define yourself to anyone. When you're Black and you're in a predominantly white community, oh hell yeah, you do. Whether or not you do, they will. And so the challenge is understanding the same privilege you have. You may love your grandkids or your nephew or niece or whoever it is you have in your care. You may love them, but you are not them and they are not you. And their experience is going to be totally different from yours because race changes everything. And so, my challenge is really to anyone, whether you are an adoptive parent, a biological parent, a custodial grandparent, uncle, or aunt, and you have Black children in your care. My challenge is for you is should you be living in a white community?
Mm-hmm.
That's my challenge for you because there is no way that's going to be a great situation for Black kids. It just isn't. And so, if you're committed to that, then I have to challenge you to be committed to raising them as in healthy of an environment as you possibly can. And at no time has an all white city, small country town been the best place to raise a Black child. Never has that been said. So um, I think it's important because I don't know what that may mean for that family. They could be living in a house that's been in their family for 500 years. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying
Sure.
that's an easy choice to make, but I'm saying it's one you must consider deeply. And if that's for some other reason for you that's not a possibility, then you have to get out of your comfort zone in other ways. You need to go to a Black church. You need to go to Black events. You need to make sure that you find some mentors. Do you have Black friends? Do your Black friends come to your house? You have to get out of your comfort zone because that's what's expected of these children every day. So where are you getting out of your comfort zone so you can help to make them more comfortable in other areas of their life if school can't be that?
I love that. And the one thing that I would add to that, this was, and I'm still would be ally. I'm not gonna, and again, that's a title that the Black community has to give myself and the listeners. That is not something that you can give yourself. But the one thing that I learned early on that was hard for me to kind of stomach is no matter how much empathy you have, no matter how many things you do as far as going to Black churches or having Black friends, can you fully understand as a white person what it's like to be in their shoes? And I want to
Absolutely.
make sure that that's stressed because I've also heard other individuals say, well, I've heard the term getting proximate because Brian Stevenson has talked about that,
Mm,
and that's good, but there's only so close that you can be because you still can go home at the end of the day to your privilege. And so I want to
absolutely.
make sure that we don't mistake doing the things that you just mentioned, Lileda, and then
Hmm.
saying, well, we understand what it's like to be you, because we never will
Exactly.
and we never can.
Exactly. Exactly. And what I'm really talking about is exposing that Black or biracial child to the
Yes.
positiveness and the culture of Blackness for their sake.
Hmm.
You'll be blessed by it too, but for their sake, because otherwise, they're gonna see it. And I can't remember, so forgive me if I repeat myself. If I mentioned this when we were talking, when I was in Oshkosh, I think I might have brought it up where I saw the little Black girl, and she looked at my daughter. She said she was with a white couple, and she could have been more than three. And she said, "Look at my daughter." Said, "Oh, that's what I'm gonna look like when I grow up." You know, the air went out of the room. So the only imagination is that that little girl had not seen somebody look like her, and that even at like two, she understood that they may have loved her, but they didn't look like her. And not only did they not look like her, she knew she didn't look like them, and she must have been imagining, well, what the hell am I gonna look like when I grow up?
Right.
And then she found out when she saw my daughter. So we all need identity, and we all need our identities confirmed and loved and processed. And it becomes even more important when you cross racially raising a child.
Mhm. And I appreciate that clarification. And I just wanted to make sure that the listeners didn't
Hmm.
hear that wrong,
Yes,
because I think there's a big distinction in what you had said. And I appreciate you adding that
absolutely.
piece on.
I love that you said that though.
Um, and in this question, I'm actually going to jump one. So this came from Kathy. So last time we talked about cultural competence, and I really appreciated your
Mhm.
perspective to say, white people can't, it really came down to white people teach other white people to be culturally competent about the Black or African American community. How can that be if we can't know you that way? And so this person mentioned cultural humility.
Mm.
It's a term they've heard recently. Have you heard the term, and what context or what does that mean to you? Because I actually personally have not heard that term.
Okay, so you know what? I'm like shit done with terms. you know, we keep trying to find some cute kind of little term to talk about race and talk about hunger. Like we can't even talk about people being starved anymore. It's food insecurity. What the hell is that? I'm
Right.
not insecure about food. I'm hungry. So terms matter not to me. And I think we can hide behind terms and titles and things. That's just in the end of the day is bullshit. So what we need humility. We need humility. And no more than we would accept white men um, teaching white men about femininity or what is it, feminism.
Yep.
We would think that was ridiculous, right? White men going around uh, doing workshops and whatnot
I
on,
love that example, because that
of
you would never
feminism.
see that. Right. Right.
We would call bullshit in a second. Okay, especially white women would. So then, why is it not ridiculous? The conversely, when you're looking at it from a racial standpoint, so I think we need to um, fuck titles and shit, and do the work. Do the work. I don't care what you call it. Treat me right. Treat my child right. Defend black girls. I don't care what you call it. Your title doesn't matter to me if you can't be it for real.
And for the listeners, I'm here. That's the second or third time you've already said that, Lilada, right? Do the work,
Mhm.
right?
Work.
Don't be putting the burden on you or others to get educated or to learn about these things. Put nice words on it. You can't put a nice word on racism, systemic
No.
racism, white supremacy. You can't put, and those are titles too, right? But again,
Mhm. I'll
those
go for that one though. White supremacy is a
I
thing.
thought I might get that one past you.
That no, 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 no. That is a thing.
It is, and but I want to make sure that people really hear that, because through this series
Mhm.
we keep hearing what's the list or the checklist, or go do the work, put this on yourself, and go move it forward. Um,
Right. But
and
then
this,
here's oh,
oh,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
But here's the thing too, even with the term like white supremacy or a white supremacist, it's easy for me to other that person. He's a white supremacist. Well, now I don't have to deal with what's going on in my soul because I'm feeding the poor and I'm tutoring black children. No one's going to call me a white supremacist, but are you? Do you think yourself superior to that black person, to that black
Mhm.
boy's mother, that makes you a white supremacist? So that's part of the problem with these titles, that it's easy to put a title on someone, then I don't have to do my own soul searching on who I am and where my weaknesses are and where my biases are. So even with the term like white supremacist, it's easy to say that's just a cluster of people who wear white hats, and it isn't. It's the teachers, it's the social workers, it's pastors, it's all of these different people who are
Yep.
hiding in plain sight, but they don't have that title. But guess what? They're doing the damage. So
Yeah, no, and Dr. G has talked about that in past events too. So for those who have not heard past events, I'd encourage you to go back and listen. And there's a podcast by him as well that speaks to how those who actually did the Zoom bombing and were vulgar and very explicit, he's not concerned about them. He's concerned about the people who are quiet because you treat individuals through those biases, but you think you're better because you're not as explicit. And really,
Exactly.
you're a huge part of the problem as a quote unquote progressive liberal. And so I want to
Right.
make sure people check that. And I would imagine, sorry, and this isn't a question on here as well, but the term anti-racism and racism, right? With the books that have come out about anti-racism, I'm guessing you feel the same way because everybody wants to be an anti-racist now. And that becomes kind of like the new term that people want to have. But in reality, I think people are quick to jump to that and then do that other again. And
The fact
what's
that
your
you
quick
said
thought on that?
the fact that you said racist, whether you put anti or pro racist, the fact that the word racist is involved, that's all I got to say.
Perfect. Thank you. And I know that's just such a big movement right now. And so I wanted to get your quick thought on that. So the next question actually came in from someone who put it in anonymously, which is totally fine. But as a white social worker, they understand the field must make way for more Black men and women to join the field. How do they assist current Black social workers or future Black social workers feel supported and valued in doing that work?
It's hard for me to speak to that exactly because I'm not working in the field of social work right now. But I will tell you, when I did work in the field of social work, at one point I think, one of the only Black, if not the only Black social worker working in Dane County for a point of time. And so I hope you can just imagine that there was no party for me every day. And, at one point in time, I had a very racist boss who actually I ended up having to report, and he was reprimanded for his words and behavior. They didn't fire him,
Hmm.
but yeah. So there's not a lot of support, and what tends to happen is that social services, whether you're talking about social work or you're talking about a rape crisis kind of place or domestic violence kind of place, Black people tend not to last long in those fields. They tend to be very oppressive, and it's kind of hard to imagine because you're thinking, but these are the people who are helping the least of these. These people must be wonderful. Certainly, these white people are not racist. Yeah, they are. And they're oppressive and they're
Sure.
dangerous because not only are they dealing with racism, they haven't dealt with their trauma. So now you got a racist who's traumatized. Not a good combination, which is why we don't tend to last in those fields.
Got it. Okay. And I don't think that trauma is brought up enough in that situation or talked about because of
Hmm.
the stigma associated with it. Um, and I remember during the event, I think it was early on, one of the first questions that came in, I'm not going to mention the person's name again, was about the absent father myth. And I know the challenge was we need to trust those involved in the work. We need to trust you, Lilada, and everybody who comes on here. But the question here is, isn't it a stereotype or myth that Black fathers are absent by choice and do not care about their children and families? And they talked a little bit more about this being a myth. Doesn't it mean it's a contradiction to the reality that many homeless families are women or mother headed? Of course, it doesn't mean that there aren't absent fathers across all races, but it is a myth that Black fathers are more absent than other races. And so it keeps going on a little bit, but wanted to just go back to the question about, isn't it a myth that Black fathers are absent by choice and do not care about their children and families?
You know, it's a narrative. How about that? It's a
Okay.
narrative that Black men are absent by choice. I think there are a slew of fathers, Black, white, and otherwise, who are absent from their children's lives by choice. Period. Period. And they need to be held accountable for that, not
Yep.
just by the mothers of the children, but by their mothers and the aunties and the uncles in the family. Like, where the hell are you? You have a kid over here, okay? So that's just across every race economic line. Um, it's complicated when you start talking about Black fathers who are missing from families and the reasons why. When you look historically at how social work worked, you could not have a man in your home and get benefits. So you either had to choose your man or your children and benefits. And so there was incentive for Black women to not have men in their home, financial incentive not to have men in their homes. It was mandated by the system that he couldn't be there. And then guess what happens? Then the narrative starts. Black men don't care about their kids, but the system created this reality for Black women to be able to survive. Black men were emasculated, and it created this really unhealthy dynamic in the Black families. And then now we're going to write reports about you all. Read the Monahan report. And so you have to understand these things from historical. It didn't just happen today. It didn't just happen last week. It's not just Johnny's father that's missing. There's a whole slew of reasons why that, again, you have to dig into it to understand. So.
Okay. And thank you for that. I just learned something. Not shocked that the system has built that. But it keeps coming back to how the system has really created the realities today. And so I just think that's an important piece that we all need to focus on.
Right. Because even in Wisconsin, there was a movement that was called Bride Fair.
Okay.
Have you heard of that?
I have not. No.
I
will admit my ignorance.
Bride Fair was, if you get married, we will increase your check. So now you're incentivizing people with money to get married. Is this person a healthy person for them to marry? But if you get married, we're going to give you more money. Bride Fair, look it up.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. And so the last question that we had, and it, to be honest, this is one that I just created at the end because I think sometimes, there's a lot of hard truths that you've shared in the event as well as tonight. And I really hope the listeners listen to this additional content. But based on everything you shared, how can the listeners as would-be allies support Black girls and start moving things forward or make things better for them than they are today? And one thing I heard you say earlier in the conversation tonight is stop assuming that everyone is well-intended and not racist.
Please.
So I want to make sure that comes back into this answer, but what other things can people really start to do, whether it's assumptions or actions that you feel are most critical?
Right. I think the best thing you can do is really try to be the best person that you can be. That's the most that you can control is yourself, your motives, your heart, your mind, and really working on that, searching your heart and your mind, and working to develop yourself to be a would-be ally. That's the best you can do. We always want to go change somebody else. We always want to change a system. Systems are built by people. You change people, they'll change their family. You change a family, they'll change a community. You change a community, it will change a society. So if you just start with yourself, that'll help with this whole entire movement. I could give you a deeper answer and give you a whole list of things, books you can read and workshops you can take.
Please don't.
I'm not going to do that.
Yep.
And support Black leadership, particularly Black women who are doing work with Black women and Black girls. Support that. Trust that we know what we need, what our girls need. Trust that,
And I think that is a perfect segue. So where we ended the last session, and I have a huge smile on my face because we really talked about the Patreon.
Yeah.
And so as you're talking about supporting Black women leaders, I happen to be talking to one, right? And so we have Patreon. And so I think we had a really awesome situation last time where you had a goal of 100 Patreons or patrons, I should say.
Yes.
And I'm excited to say that you surpassed that goal. The audience and the attendees jumped in.
Yes.
So for all of the listeners, I'm excited to say, because she hit 100 supporters, she is going to produce a tipsy episode of a conversation with an angry Black woman, with a couple girlfriends and some bottle of rum. Hopefully it's a little bit bigger than that.
Yes.
And as we talked before, that will be coming. So that's something that I know you'll be scheduling. And I'm really excited for that. But I want to put a plug in too for those who didn't donate for whatever reason. If you do donate, I was just on your website before we had this chat tonight, and it will unlock access to 47 exclusive posts that you have on your website. And so if you want to hear more from Lilada, in addition to the podcast that we talked about, in addition to some of those other resources that we'll share, I would strongly recommend you donate to become a patron. I saw it goes anywhere from $2 to 10 to 25 up to 100 or more. It's whatever you can financially make feasible. But I want to push that. And I saw that your next goal is 250 supporters. And I love that. And when you hit that, you're going to create season 2 of Black Girl Inspired podcast that inspires Black girls to live their best lives. And so I wanted to re-push that ask out to all of the listeners. Consider donating. Consider supporting Lilada, being the local Black artist, the Black leader, or the leader who is Black. And so I want to make sure that as I kicked off with all of the things you're doing in our community, you are changing our community. And I want to make sure that you're getting the support necessary as well.
I love that. And there's 2 that I'd like to just highlight right quick. I have one at the $50 level, which is Inspire Black Girls. And with that, for each person that joins at that level each month, I'll be sharing art with the local nonprofit, shelter, school, what have you. But particularly, I'll be supporting other Black women who have initiatives, who are working with Black girls and getting art in their hands that they can use with their girls. And at the $100 level, I'm inviting you into a monthly live session with me.
Love it. Yep.
And so if you like what happened here, Dan, I don't know if you're good for me or you bad for me, but you bring out the truth in me. You in this bottle of rum.
I think it's the rum.
So if you would love some live time with me, where we just talk about different topics around defending Black girlhood and have opportunities like a podcast, but you'll be able to ask me questions, I would encourage you to think about that. And if it's not for you, maybe you want to gift that to someone else who really is wanting to lean into allyship, who's really wanting to grow as a would-be ally.
I love that. And so thank you. I love that push or recommendation as well. Get this out to your circle.
Yeah.
Who are your family and friends who maybe didn't view the episode or this follow-up? Send this to them, encourage them to listen. And then of course, obviously make sure that you recommend the Patreon and supporting Lilada. And so with that was the questions that we had. And so thank you for your time tonight. We'll make sure this obviously is included in the follow-up email. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Me too. This was fun. I thank you. And I thank you all for your support. And thank you all for your questions as well.